Fame, power, fortune, and a dark secret that nearly broke Will Smith from the inside out. Get ready to uncover the hidden side of one of the greatest icons of our generation. Some wounds don't leave visible scars, but they shape everything you are. And more than that, everything you believe you have to become. Just to survive. Before the Hollywood spotlight. Before the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Before the cheers, the fame, and the flashing cameras. Will Smith was just a kid, trying to keep himself together inside a house that kept breaking apart in screams. He was born in West Philadelphia, 1968, a neighborhood where screeching tires on the corner and slamming doors echoed as often as the uncomfortable silence at dinner. His father, Willard Smith Sr., was a former military man. Strict, controlling, and often violent. His mother, Carolyn, was a school administrator. Smart, strong, compassionate. She tried to shield her children from an environment that, at times, became unbearable. But she couldn't always protect them. And Will was there, watching, feeling, swallowing the pain in silence. He was just 9 years old when he saw his father hit his mother so hard. She collapsed, unconscious, bleeding, helpless, defenseless. And him? He just stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. Years later, he confessed, that moment broke something in me because I realized I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't protect her. And that's where Will Smith's real story begins, not on stage, not in the movies, but deep within him. That pain planted something inside, a voice that whispered every single day, you can't fail, you have to make everyone laugh, you have to be perfect, or everything will fall apart. And that's how the comedian was born, not out of talent, but out of survival. Will became the class clown, the kid who made everyone laugh before the storm could hit. Being funny was his way of staying in control. If people were laughing, maybe they wouldn't be yelling. And it was in that instinct, this subtle game of masks, that his creativity was born. Rhyming words, spinning stories, inventing characters. It was how he escaped, and maybe how he started to heal. In his teens, he teamed up with a local DJ named Jeffrey Towns, better known as Jazzy Jeff. Together, they created a rap duo that was funny, light, playful, completely different from the gangsta scene taking over hip-hop at the time. While most rap talked about hate, street wars, survival, Will and Jeff rapped about flirting, parties, and everyday life. And guess what? It worked. Their album went multi-platinum. They won the very first Grammy ever awarded in rap history. Will Smith, barely 20 years old, was already a millionaire. But even with money, fame, and standing ovations, that 9-year-old boy still lived inside him, afraid, silent, ashamed, because success doesn't erase pain, and applause doesn't heal trauma. Will bought cars, mansions, traveled the world, stood on the biggest stages, but at night, when the lights went out, that moment would come back. That voice would return. You failed. You didn't protect the one you loved. And the bigger he became, the louder the guilt grew inside. Until one day, during a deep conversation with his mother, she looked him in the eyes and said, "Son, you are not responsible for your father's choices, but you are responsible for what you do with the pain." Those words pierced straight through him like an arrow, and for the first time, Will began to see his journey differently. What if what he went through wasn't punishment? What if it was preparation? What if he came into this world, not to hide from the pain, but to transform it? He started to realize that trauma can be a portal, that the greatest pain can carry the greatest gifts. Because the truth is, his childhood didn't break Will Smith. It built the foundation of who he would become. It taught him that humor can be a bridge, that art can be a form of healing, and even fear can be fuel. And so, the boy who once stood frozen in the face of pain began, little by little, to find his true voice, because pain is inevitable. But what you choose to do with it, that defines who you are. The world looked at Will Smith and saw a young millionaire, a phenomenon, charismatic, funny, successful. But what no one saw was the weight he carried when the spotlight faded. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Hit records, brand deals, crowds screaming his name. But inside, Will was drowning. He had made millions through music, but he had never learned how to manage money. He spent compulsively, bought without thinking, paid outrageous salaries to a chaotic entourage of friends, family, and hangers-on. And in no time, the fortune he built disappeared. Then came the knock on the door, the IRS. He owed nearly $3 million in back taxes. Everything was frozen, bank accounts locked. The government started seizing his assets, his cars, his house, his studio gear, one by one. Just like that, the golden boy became the guy who was almost broke. And the cruelest part? The silence. Because Will didn't tell anyone. He didn't ask for help, didn't cry out for support. He smiled during interviews, joked around with friends, posted happy photos. But when he was alone, he cried, blamed himself, asked quietly, "How did I let this happen?" This wasn't just a financial collapse. It was an identity crisis. Who was he without the cars, without the lights, without the millions? The same fame that built him was now threatening to break him. And like so many who lose control, Will tried to run. He stepped out of the spotlight, withdrew from public life, spent months drifting through studios, bars, parties, chasing a second chance, a new purpose, any clue about what to do with his life. That's when an unexpected invitation came. Quincy Jones, the legendary music producer and longtime friend, invited Will to an impromptu script reading. It was a new show, a comedy about a poor kid who moves in with his wealthy relatives. It was called The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will hesitated. He wasn't an actor. He had never done TV. He could barely memorize lines, but Quincy believed in him. He saw something Will couldn't see himself, a natural light, a magnetic presence, and more than that. He knew this role could save Will's life. The reading happened right there, in the middle of a party, between glasses and laughter. Will held the script with shaking hands, but once he started performing, everything changed. The room went still. People laughed, they connected, and Quincy sealed it right then and there. That's our Fresh Prince. Will got the part. But it wasn't just a sitcom. It was a chance to reinvent himself. The kid from West Philly, the rapper who almost lost everything, was now staring at the greatest opportunity of his life. But with that opportunity came fear. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he failed again? Will dove headfirst into the role. He memorized every single line, not just his, but everyone's on set. He pushed himself obsessively, demanded perfection. He needed to prove to himself that he wasn't that 9-year-old kid who stood frozen while his mother suffered. And the show? It exploded. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air became a cultural phenomenon. Will Smith had become a global icon, a household name, a superstar. But behind that bright smile on the late-night couch still stood a man trying to heal, trying to figure out who he really was. Because success can hide the pain, but it never erases it. Deep down, Will still carried the weight of his childhood, the memory of losing everything, the shame, the constant fear that it could all fall apart again, at any moment. So he made a vow to himself, I will never let myself end up in that position again. And from that promise, a new mindset was born. More than fame, Will wanted to become unshakable. He studied obsessively, business models, psychology, performance, self-mastery. Every interview, every book, every role he accepted, it was all part of the puzzle. He didn't just want to act. He wanted to understand the mind, how high performers think, how the successful make decisions, how real leaders move through the world. Will Smith was rebuilding himself from the inside out. Because when everything crashes down around you, you have two options. You either get buried in the rubble, or you rise with a new kind of power. And Will chose to rise. Because every empire begins from within. And those who rise from ashes carry a strength the world still struggles to understand. Will Smith had made his comeback from nearly broke to the star of one of the most watched sitcoms in America. The Fresh Prince had become a symbol of style, of humor, of representation. But while the world saw success, Will felt pressure. On the outside, he was the guy everyone wanted to be. But inside, he was still that kid from West Philly, desperately trying to prove he was enough. What most people don't know is this. During the tapings of the show, Will lived in a constant state of alert. He didn't want to mess up, didn't want to get replaced, didn't want to let anyone down. So he memorized every single script, literally every line of every character. If you go back and watch the early episodes, you can actually see Will's lips moving during his co-star's lines. He was reciting the entire scene on autopilot, not out of ego, but out of fear. The fear of failing, the fear of losing everything he had worked so hard to rebuild. That perfectionism? It came from something deeper, a wound from childhood, a voice in his head that whispered, "You're only loved when you're useful." So Will made a silent vow. He wouldn't just be good. He would be the best, the sharpest, the most prepared, the hardest worker in every room. And as the Fresh Prince exploded into a cultural phenomenon, Hollywood came knocking. Movie scripts, major roles, a whole new world of opportunity. That's when Will made one of the boldest choices of his career. He walked away from his comfort zone, left the safety of the sitcom to chase something uncertain. Hollywood was a different game, way more cutthroat, more demanding, and far less forgiving when you failed. But Will had an obsession. He studied box office data like a scientist. He analyzed what kinds of films made it big, what kind of characters the world adored, what the biggest stars in the world had in common. He was building his career the way someone builds a brand. He used to say, "If I want to be the biggest star in the world, I need to understand how the biggest stars in the world think." That's how he chose his first major roles. Big budget blockbusters, global appeal, magnetic, charming characters. Independence Day was the first major step, a massive global success. Then came Men in Black, the film that solidified Will as a box office powerhouse. And then, year after year, he started breaking records. An unstoppable streak of #1 films, one after another, topping charts around the world. But with every win came a new kind of pressure. Now he wasn't just climbing. He was fighting to stay on top. And being #1? It's glorious. But staying #1 is a lonely war. Will was living at an insane pace. Movie after movie. Set after set. Press tours, interviews, photo shoots. Always smiling. Always performing. Always delivering more than expected. But behind that confident gaze was a man running on empty. A man wrestling with his own emotions. He wanted to be strong, but he felt fragile. He wanted to be a role model, but he felt incomplete. And while the world applauded, Will began to ask himself, is all this success worth the price I'm paying? He was becoming more strategic, but also more distant from his own essence. He kept shaping himself to fit what others expected of him. But in silence, he missed who he used to be. And when the cameras turned off, he'd come home to a kind of emptiness no award, no contract, no $1 million check could ever fill. Because there's a kind of success that pulls you away from your own truth. A shine so blinding, it dims your inner light. And Will started to realize that what truly mattered wasn't being the richest or the most famous. It was being whole, being true, being free. But that awareness, it was still just a whisper, one he tried to ignore. So he kept going, producing, acting, winning, until life forced him to stop. Because every empire built without balance eventually crumbles. And Will was about to face the greatest collapse of his life. The world was at his feet. He wasn't just a movie star. He was a phenomenon, a cultural force, a symbol of the impossible made real. Films like Ali, The Pursuit of Happiness, I Am Legend, 7 Pounds, each role felt surgically chosen, and it was. Will once said, "I study the market the way an engineer studies structures." Success isn't luck, it's science. He had achieved every artist's dream: creative freedom, prestige, the love of a global audience. But the higher you fly, the harder the fall. And behind the cameras, Will was beginning to unravel. The relentless pursuit of perfection was draining everything. His energy, his peace, his relationships. He had become obsessed with control. And little by little, that control began breaking his connection with the people he loved most. His marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith, which looked solid in the public eye, was starting to show deep cracks. Will wanted to be the perfect provider, the perfect father, the perfect husband, the perfect star. But in trying to be everything for everyone, he started being nothing for himself. In interviews, Jada would say, he lived as if he was always on stage, always in character, always wearing a mask. And that disconnection reached a breaking point when Jada revealed she was battling a silent depression. She said she no longer recognized herself. She didn't feel alive. She didn't feel seen. And Will, despite all his success, felt powerless. I built castles, but I couldn't build a real home. That was one of the most painful confessions he ever made. While he was winning awards, he was losing moments. While he was captivating crowds, he was watching his family drift away. And the hardest part? He didn't know how to stop, didn't know how to rest, didn't know how to simply be, because his identity had become tied to performance. If he wasn't winning, he felt like he was nothing. So he began looking for answers beyond the industry. He started therapy, explored spirituality, took introspective trips, and wrote his memoir. For the first time, Will was ready to look inward, to truly listen to that scared little boy from West Philly, to face his wounds without having to hide them behind a perfect smile. And in that process, he made one of the most courageous decisions of his life. He began to tell the truth about his mistakes, his fears, his pain. And the more he shed the image of the ideal man, the more real he became, the more free. But sometimes the universe tests our transformation with moments that seem to push us right back into chaos. And that test would come for Will at the most unexpected moment, before billions of eyes, on the stage of the biggest awards night on the planet. A night that began as a coronation would end as an emotional earthquake, because sometimes life exposes us not to punish us, but to show us exactly where we still need to heal. And Will was about to face his greatest mirror. It was supposed to be the night of his crowning achievement. Will Smith, after decades of a flawless career, was about to receive the most coveted prize in cinema, the Oscar for Best Actor. The whole world was watching, the sparkle in his eyes, the perfectly tailored suit, his wife by his side. Everything seemed perfect, but behind that smile, Something was boiling. Will was emotionally at his breaking point. Months of exposure of his personal life on social media, public jokes, media judgments. He was holding a volcano inside his chest. And then, what was supposed to be just another stage joke became history. Chris Rock made a joke about Jada's appearance. Uncomfortable laughter echoed through the theater. At first, Will tried to smile. But when he looked at his wife's face, he saw the pain in her eyes, the humiliation, the same pain she had been silently facing for years. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Will stood up, walked toward the stage, and in front of millions of viewers, delivered a slap across the presenter's face. Silence, shock, disbelief. No one understood. No one believed it. Will returned to his seat and yelled, "Keep my wife's name out of your ******ing mouth." It was brutal. It was intense. It was human. But it was also destructive. The night that was meant to be the pinnacle of his journey became headline news for all the wrong reasons. Minutes later, he won the Oscar for his performance in King Richard. He walked onto the stage with tears in his eyes and gave one of the most unsettling speeches in awards history. He apologized to the Academy, spoke about love, about protection, about how sometimes pain transforms us into versions of ourselves we don't even recognize. And then he stepped down from the stage, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The backlash came like an avalanche from the media, social networks, fellow artists, fans. Some condemned him harshly. Others defended him with empathy. But the truth is, it wasn't just Will Smith, the star they saw. It was Will, a human being, a man in pieces, trying to hold up an image, while inside he was falling apart. And the fall was painful. Projects canceled. Contracts suspended. A 10-year ban from the Academy. But what hurt the most was the look in his children's eyes, the silence of Jada, the emptiness of having stained with a single act a lifetime of achievements. Will withdrew, vanished from social media, stopped giving interviews, and plunged into a deep journey of healing. He understood that slap wasn't just about Chris Rock. It was about years and years of buried pain, swallowed anger, unhealed wounds, unresolved trauma. It was the cry of a man who spent his life trying to please everyone and forgot to take care of himself. Will began to revisit his shadows, to face his ego head on, to confront the parts of himself he had long tried to hide. And there, at the bottom of the pit, he found something success had never given him: freedom. The freedom to be imperfect, the freedom to fail, the freedom to say, "I am human, and I am trying to learn." And with that honesty came reconnection with his family, with his own soul, with his real mission in the world, because the slap the world saw for him was a wake-up call, not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter. More authentic, more aware, more whole. Sometimes the universe doesn't break us to punish us. It breaks us so we can rebuild with more truth. And that's exactly what Will Smith began to do. After the storm comes silence. And in that silence, only what stands remains. Will Smith, the global star, had hit rock bottom in front of the whole world. But it was there, on the ground, that he would discover the truest part of himself. No spotlights, no applause, no masks, alone with his mistakes, with his pain, and a question echoing in his mind: who am I? Without the movies, without the awards, without the fans? For months, Will disappeared, vanished from social media, canceled commitments, and allowed himself to do what he had never done before: feel the shame, the fear, the insecurity, the anger at himself. He began to write, to meditate, to talk with people outside his circle, ordinary people, men who had also failed, fathers who had also lost control, husbands who were also trying to fix something broken, and for the first time will put aside the armor of the perfect star and embrace the hardest role of his life, that of an imperfect man trying to start over. He began to seek deeper answers, not in scripts, nor advice from executives, but within himself. He attended spiritual retreats, studied Stoic philosophy, dove deep into principles of Stoicism, self-knowledge, and emotional intelligence. And the more he silenced his ego, the more he heard his soul. One of his biggest breakthroughs came when he said in an interview, "I realized I spent my whole life trying to be loved, when what I really needed was to learn to love myself." That sentence sums up the entire reconstruction, because the slap, as controversial as it was only the surface. The root ran much deeper. It was in the boy from West Philly who wanted so badly to be seen that he shaped his entire existence to please the world. And along the way, he lost himself, while also reconnected with his family, not as the provider, but as the man willing to listen, to change, to rebuild trust. He and Jada had difficult conversations. They cried together, revisited old wounds, and little by little, they redefined their marriage. It was no longer about appearances. It was about essence, about being partners in healing, not just on stage. With his children, Will opened his heart, asked for forgiveness, heard hard truths, and showed them with vulnerability what it means to be a real man. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to admit them, to take responsibility, and to move forward with integrity. And this reconstruction began to overflow into the world. Will began to speak with more depth in his interviews, to share lessons instead of achievements, to show his pain instead of his victories. He stopped being just an idol and became a real inspiration, human, authentic. In a podcast, he said, "I'd rather be loved for who I am than idolized for a false version of myself." That sentence resonated deeply with many, because everyone, on some level, knows this struggle between image and essence, between expectation and truth, and Will was choosing the truth, even if it was harder, even if it cost him followers, contracts, popularity, because he had understood that true success isn't what gets applause, it's what remains. And that's what he started to build, a legacy of truth, a legacy of humanity, a legacy that doesn't depend on trophies. Sometimes life tears down everything we are, not to destroy us, but to show us who we never stop being. And Will Smith was finally ready to become what no fame can buy, a whole man. When Will Smith finally stepped back into the light, he was no longer the same man. The voice was still the same, the charismatic smile too. But the eyes, the eyes don't lie. They carried something else now, wisdom, presence, and peace. Will didn't come back to reclaim applause. He returned to offer something he had never given before, his truth. Where once he stepped onto the stage to be the star, now he showed up with the intention to be a mirror, a reflection for millions who had stumbled, who had fallen, who were still trying to rise again. And the most remarkable part? He didn't apologize with words alone. He apologized through transformation. Instead of hiding behind excuses, Will began creating content that spoke directly to the pain of others. Talks, raw, honest videos, vulnerable posts, meetings with at-risk youth, conversations with men searching for self-control. He started using his fame not as a shield, but as a tool for collective healing. In one of those conversations, he said something that hit like a punch to the gut. You can't fix the world if you're still running away from fixing yourself. That sentence echoed as a hard truth for many, because it's easy to point fingers at others' mistakes. The real challenge? holding the mirror up to your own face. And that's exactly what Will did. He didn't just rebuild his career. He rebuilt his mission. He traded the stage for his soul, success for meaning, idolatry for real connection. And the most magical thing? In doing so, the world began to see him differently. Not as the actor who slapped the Oscar, but as the man who found the courage to transform in front of everyone. Will began to take on projects with a whole new approach, deeper stories, more human characters, narratives about forgiveness, second chances, resilience. And every time he spoke, it wasn't the actor on the set. It was the man behind the myth, the father, the son, a soul searching for meaning. In one interview, he said, "Everything that happened to me was necessary for me to stop acting in life and actually start living." And maybe that was his greatest performance of all, just being himself. No filters, no scripts, no perfection, just truth, just presence, just awareness. And that's why the world began to love him in a new way. A love that's more mature, more real, more connected to the soul of the human being behind the star. Because in the end, true greatness isn't about never falling. True greatness is getting up with humility, looking into the eyes of those who saw you fail, and saying, "I'm still learning." Will Smith didn't come back the same. He came back better. And this is where the story shifts. What once was scandal became a lesson. What once was a fall became momentum. What once was shame became light. Something remarkable happens when someone chooses to live in truth. The world feels it. Will Smith, now lighter in spirit and deeper in gaze, began to become something far greater than an actor. He became a kind of guide. Not the kind of guide who stands above you, but the one who reaches out beside you. Because Will knew he wasn't the only one who'd stumbled. And that's exactly what made him more human and more needed. He started using his platforms to share short, powerful reflections. Words like, "Pain is inevitable. Guilt is optional. But growth, that's a daily choice. The scars you hide might be the medicine someone else needs." Being strong isn't about controlling everything. It's about allowing yourself to feel without losing your way. Those messages hit hard because they came from someone who had lived it, someone who'd felt shame, fear, guilt, and yet chose to rise anyway. And more than just talking, Will began acting with purpose. He launched programs supporting youth in underserved communities, started visiting schools. He shared his story, not to impress, but to inspire. Sitting down with lost teens, he'd say, "I came from nothing too. I carried anger, confusion, doubt. But believe me, when you use your pain as fuel, it can take you far." At one meeting, a 17-year-old asked him, "How did you get past the shame of failing in front of everyone?" Will looked him in the eye, took a deep breath, and said, "The secret isn't to get over shame. It's to turn it into a bridge. When you realize your fall can keep someone else from falling, that's when you know it was worth it." That answer became a video. It went viral. Not because it was said by a celebrity, but because it spoke to what we all feel, the fear of not being enough. Will also started getting invited to events, not as an actor, but as a man reborn in life. Talks on resilience, conferences on conscious masculinity, discussions on mental health, and he spoke without pretense. No pretending to be perfect, just presence. At one packed auditorium, he said something that struck deep. "We live in a society that teaches you how to win, but nobody teaches you how to fail. I learned that failing is the raw material of true strength. It was only when everything fell apart that I found where my foundation truly lay. Silence, applause, and tears. Because there, on that stage, there wasn't a star. There was a mirror." And maybe that became Will's new gift, to reflect the soul of everyone who listened. He showed that real life isn't made up of victories alone. It's made of choices, of pauses, of silent rebuildings that no one sees, but that change everything inside. While the world chased fame, Will chased purpose. And the deeper he went within himself, the wider his impact grew in the world. He began getting invited to mentorships, roundtables, spiritual interviews, and every time he spoke, he left a mark. Not the mark of a celebrity, but the mark of a human being who's lived every lesson he's teaching. And that's what builds true connection, because audiences don't connect with perfection. They connect with humanity, with vulnerability, with someone who's fallen, but chose to rise again with intention. And Will was more intentional than ever. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing meaning. He wasn't trying to control everything. He was trying to give and to trust. We've reached the end of this journey, but Will Smith's story is far from over. In fact, it's just begun a new chapter, a chapter not written with applause, awards, or headlines. Will realize that true legacy isn't about what you achieve. It's about what you transform. And he didn't just transform himself. He transformed the way millions see pain, failure, and redemption. He became a living symbol that success, real success, isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the ability to learn from them. This message he carries isn't just for the bright lights of the stage. It's for you, sitting there on the other side, fighting your own battles. Will could have gotten lost in fame, judgment, shame. But he chose to find himself in vulnerability. He chose to show that even the greatest, yes, even the greatest, face storms. And the way out of those storms lies in one simple, yet powerful word: restart. Restart isn't failure. Restart is courage. Restart is honoring yourself enough not to give up. At the end of the day, the greatest lesson Will Smith leaves for the world is this: life isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about embracing every part of yourself, the light and the shadows, and moving forward every single day. And if you feel like you've fallen, failed, or stumbled, know that you're not alone. That's the human condition. But just like Will, you can turn your falls into bridges to a future that's stronger, more conscious, more authentic. Imagine if Will Smith had given up, if he had stayed silent and disappeared after everything that happened. What would the world have lost? And what might you be about to lose if you don't decide today to own your own transformation? What Will shows us is that true strength lies in honesty with yourself, in accepting that we're all a work in progress, that every day is a new chance to choose who we want to be. And the most beautiful part? That choice is right here, right now, within your reach. Today, you stand at a crossroads. Will you watch your life pass by? Or will you step up and become the hero of your own transformation? Will made his choice. He chose to be the hero. And that choice changed everything. What about you? What will you choose? If Will Smith's story touched you, if it made you pause and reflect on your own battles, then I want you to do one thing right now. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what's the biggest lesson you're taking from this story? Share your truth, your experience. Because here, at Success Mindset, your voice matters. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Together, we'll keep growing, learning from real stories of resilience and transformation that change lives. You are not alone on this journey. I believe in your power to reinvent yourself. And I'll be right here by your side, helping you build the success mindset you deserve. Thank you for being here with me till the end. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll keep fueling your evolution.